Welcome to Lecture 8, and as usual, let us do a quick recap of what we covered in the previous lecture. Now, in Lecture 7, we looked at public relations as a process which builds mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and their publics through communication. So public relations can be viewed as a tool for persuasion through four rhetorics. First is ethos, which looks at the speaker's credibility and character. The second is pathos, which looks at appealing to emotions. And the last is logos, which is using logic and reason, which includes evidence such as testimonials and statistics. And lastly, we're looking at kairos, which is time. Now, public relations works as a mediator between organizations and their publics and aim to communicate meanings effectively. And we can understand this through the process of semiotics. Last lecture, we also went through the four phases of public relations, which you can use for your group projects. Now, there's always some confusion between strategy and tactics, so let me go through this as well. Now, when you think of strategy, you want to think about your big idea, whereas your tactics is more like your action plan. So, for example, I want to go to the cinema to watch a movie. That will be my strategy. That is my big idea. That's my intention. Now, the tactic, the action plan could be this. I go online to check for movie timings and to see if there are any tickets left. I see the seat that I want and I see that there are tickets left. I will purchase the ticket online. I then leave my house and then I take the bus, reach the cinema, enter the cinema and watch the film. Now, that's my action plan, right? In order to achieve my strategy, which is going to the cinema to watch a movie. So let's go into this lecture, Campaign Strategy, Media, and Evaluation. So in this lecture, we'll be looking at why public relations is seen as strategic communication. We'll see how the Shannon-Weaver model of communication is applied through public relations and also provide tips on strategic messaging and communicating effectively. I'll also provide you with a foundational understanding on how to evaluate your campaign. Now, if we look at the broad definition of public relation, it's often associated with how we maintain the relationship between organizations and the publics. But there are many different types of public relations, and I'm going to give you two examples: corporate or commercial public relations, and government or non-governmental organization or public's public relation. Now, first, when we think about corporate communication, it is more concerned on how you communicate what your organization does to a specific market. And it's also about persuading a target audience to buy a certain product or service or to change their behavior through building relationships. So remember what we talked about in the last lecture when we talked about the difference between public relations and marketing. There are overlaps, but marketing is more about increasing revenue, whereas public relations primary goal is to build trust. Now, also recall to the last lecture where I showed you two clips from Apple. Now, one is focusing on Apple's sustainability efforts, which is to build their reputation so that as audiences, you feel good about the brand and therefore builds trust, and then you are likely to purchase their product because you trust that brand. While the other video I showed you is focused on the functions of the new iPhone, which is an example of marketing. Now, there's also public relations for governments where they are concerned with citizens and persuading them to engage towards certain policies, desires, practices, or behaviors. And I'm sure many of you would have seen this government's anti-vape campaign either on the train, bus stop, or social media. Now, you would have seen it somewhere, and I noticed them when I'm at train stations, when I'm coming to NUS. Now, I'm going to show you this example of the anti-vape campaign, and it's not the video that is on currently. Now, this was the original video that first came out to discuss why we shouldn't vape. Now, I definitely prefer this video than the one that's currently on now because I thought this was very well done compared to what we've been recently exposed to. So let's watch this video together.
Well, I've known him for a while. I thought it was cool at first, but he's just a bad influence. Gets me in all sorts of trouble. And he's too clingy. I can't seem to get away from him. I feel so suffocated by him. He's literally killing me. I think this relationship is toxic.
What you'll notice is that a campaign like this doesn't just sit in one medium. They are across multiple media and they work across different channels, including social media, posters, television, or even a press release. Now, the quote that you see on screen right now is from this lecture's reading, and this is an important quote, especially for your group's projects. Now, this week's reading demonstrates why it's important for us to understand the key concepts, right? Also known as theoretical frameworks of public relations, and to also help you visualize what a public relation plan looks like. Now, both readings from this week and last week are books that you'll go through that you will be using throughout your journey with us at CNM. I also use it for my campaign course in my 4,000 level courses. Now, okay, back to this reading here. So in this reading, Smith writes about how strategic is not just about persuasion, but it's also very much about accountability to the public and their responses. So strategic communication is not just about being persuasive, but being responsive to the public, which that the organization believed to be important. Now, there are three features of strategic communication. First, to inform and persuade your public about the organization's product and service, but it can be broader than this and be linked to the brand's image or the importance of a particular behavior. For example, during COVID-19, the importance of wearing a mask. Now, being strategic also requires a two-way response. In other words, it needs to be dialogical. As an organization, we need to be responsive too. So if people are expressing unhappiness about what an organization is doing or a hostile response about a campaign, we need to respond right away. We can't bury our heads in the sand and go to bed and hope the problem would go away, because it never goes away. We need to respond and deal with it head on. And lastly, in strategic communication, we need to be open to use multiple channels of communication. So it shouldn't just sit on social media, but perhaps through news and industry publications, billboards, bus stop ads, and so forth. Now, we saw this last week with SMRT example, where they released a press release and the Straits Times covered it. And they also posted their own content on their social media platform. Now, based on this antiviral campaign that we saw earlier, I'd like you to think about two things. What the campaign is trying to tell the public, and what is it that they're trying to persuade them to do. So we'll watch the video again together while you have a think.
Well, I've known him for a while. I thought it was cool at first, but he's just a bad influence. Gets me in all sorts of trouble. And he's too clingy. I can't seem to get away from him. I feel so suffocated by him. He's literally killing me. I think this relationship is toxic.
So the campaign is aiming to get audiences to stop vaping by using language understood by their target audience, which is Gen Zs and millennials. Now, the tone is to avoid using a top-down approach, but humor as an emotion to attract attention. Now, the campaign is also aiming to be an authoritative figure by showing the consequences of being caught vaping. Now, with the No to Vaping campaign, they have this on their website, and you can also sign up to be part of their mailing list. There were also bus stop ads and MRT posters and billboards around Singapore, and these were placed near educational institutions as well as drinking and partying spots. And do you know why they did that? Well, it's because they're trying to target the population that vapes and they try to target the population that vapes and where they're most likely to vape, right? These are their publics. And how do they identify this? Well, they do this through research, which will provide evidence to support the justification of their strategy and tactics, and is something that you would need to do too. Now, with their new campaign that's currently ongoing, you can see that they're using the same strategy where you see the ads at hawker centers, at bus stops, and so forth. Now, for the particular campaign that I've just showed you, they also created a digital advertisement on TikTok, and you can click on the link to find out more. They also posted organic content, which is non-paid content or advertisement, on their social media. Lastly, they also worked with news publications in Singapore to get coverage on the campaign. Now, you can see that it's not a literal, direct response to the advertisement, but it's looking at how effective the campaign is. So what this campaign has done is set the agenda to demonstrate the positive impact of the campaign. Now, looking at agenda setting theory, you can see that now the government's stance on vaping has changed, where there's a higher punishment. So, therefore, the tone of news around vaping has also changed. Now, this is another example of the agenda setting theory, where the media sets the agenda of the tone and the type of content for us to consume. Now, the next example here is based on the concept of how public relation requires communication professionals to be dialogic and responsive to its public. Now, in 2023, Zara released an advertisement campaign that was criticized by the public as they were accused of showing insensitivity to the Gaza conflict. Now, the campaign was to advertise the jacket that you see the lady in black wearing on screen. Now, the publics were saying that the imagery looks very similar to what is happening in Palestine. Now, if you're interested to find out more, you can click on the link or do an internet search. Now, they heard what the public was saying, they being Zara, and with all strategic communication, it requires a two-way response. Now, they did pull the advertisement for circulation and issued an apology, but look at what they said. Unfortunately, some customers felt offended. Now, if majority of the public are feeling negatively about this advertisement and the Zara campaign, what it's doing here in their response is presenting a disconfirming climate for the audience. Now, because it's not a critique on a particular social or cultural group, Kairos here plays an important role too. Why? Because if that campaign that you just saw was not released during the height of the Israel-Gaza conflict, none of this comment would have happened. Zara also responded quickly, but it didn't help that they had a previous controversy where one of their designers made anti-Palestinian comments. So this is also an example of Kairos. So even though you're listening to the public as an organization and responding to them, responding using disconfirming climate will never work, especially when your audiences are already unhappy. Now, when we think about the difference between projects and programs, we associate projects to marketing communications, where programs and campaigns are more likely to be grounded in public relations communications because they are responsive and usually address multiple objectives. Now, remember we talked about the Shannon-Weaver model of communication in the last lecture, where we used Direct Singapore campaign. So let's look deeper into this to see how we can apply it to public relations and also to your group projects. Now, when we think about strategies in public relations, we can't just think, oh, I want to do this creatively. We actually have to think of the whole process. What kind of message does my campaign convey? And how am I going to convey it and to whom? Now, the sender here is your client. You are representing your client. Now, if you work in an agency, the brief that you get is from your client, and they will be interested in creating a campaign to a particular audience. Now, in order to create a campaign, the client will give you a brief, and based on this brief, you will have to develop the key message that they want you to communicate to the public. Then, you need to think of what form does it take, and how do you know which channels you're going to use? How is the message going to be conveyed? Now, in terms of channel, when we're talking about campaign, this is where your tactics sit, your action plan. What are your audiences hearing? What are they seeing? And how are you engaging them to the message? Now, when we look at the receiver, we need to ask ourselves, why is our message appropriate for the receiver? And in what way will it reach the target audience? Would it be congruent, like through Zara's campaign, or will it align with the sender, which is the client organization? For example, if your campaign target audience was for university students within your age group and you use Facebook as your medium, it's not a good idea, isn't it? Because most of you are not on Facebook, and you being part of Gen Z. So using this medium as a channel doesn't work because it is not going to reach your target audience. Now, every decision that you make needs to be explicitly discussed, and you need to justify why you're making these decisions. And you can think about applying the SMCR model into your team's projects to identify your key strategies. Now, when you're developing your public relations plan, you need to ensure that everything flows properly and that everything is coherent. The SMCR model can help you identify key strategies of your public relations plan. Now, research on the client is very important as well to understand where they stand, their position in the industry, topic, or even the context of how they are viewed by the general public. Now, for your group projects, you don't have to do this, but in the real world, you actually have to do a lot of research on your client before you develop your campaign, and it's something you'll be doing in your 4th year. Now, we'll jump to the end of the model, which is your target audience or receiver. Now, your target audience could have certain attitudes about a particular issue. So, for example, with the anti-vape campaign, your target audience might think vaping is not an issue since it's legal in so many countries. Now, based on understanding what your target audience thinks and believe about an issue, you then need to identify your key message and channel strategies to engage and reach out to them. Now, for the anti-vape campaign that you saw earlier, you can see based on the word choices that were being used, you know that their target audience is your age, early 20s to early 30s, based on the language used in the video. Hence, the placement of their advertisement and social media platforms they are using needs to be taken into consideration. So this is an example of how message and channel works. So you also realize that their key message is not just telling you that vaping is bad for you, but there's an emphasis on the health harms and also how illegal it is too. So when you think about the message, you want to think about these elements, and these elements could be something that's visual. How will you be communicating your message then? And that will be your tactic. Now, I would suggest that you take a 5-minute break here before going on to the next section where we'll talk about messaging. Now, when we talk about messaging, it's about how messaging fosters understanding and encourages the support of our audiences. We want to ensure that our intended message is not lost in the noise. So a good message strategy expresses an organization's or brand purpose and its character so that audiences will understand who they are and what they do, giving them the ability to differentiate them from other organizations, such as their competitors. We can do this through the 3 C's, which is credibility, control, and charisma. We'll be going through the 3 C's, and the words to describe what the 3 C's are basically exactly what they mean. Credibility is about the power to inspire belief in your public. There are many drivers to credibility, and sometimes we believe a message because of a status of a person who is speaking, for example, the president of Singapore or the CEO of your company, or even as me, the course coordinator of this course. Now, this is dependent on how much you trust a person and how much status you place on that person. So doctors are an example of this because of their expertise, especially during the pandemic. Sometimes an individual can have credibility because of perceived honesty. We believe in that person. So this can be subjective, but everyone will look at it in the same way, or majority of the people will look at it in the same way. For example, your best friend has an argument with their partner. You may believe your best friend more than their partner. Or during elections time, you'll tend to believe the party that you think is the most honest and support your ideology. Or a speaker is seen to be competent to you, so you will trust what they say. So for example, in your group project, there might be someone who always gets the answers right in class, or just get what I'm saying or what Oshani is saying. Based on their competency with this particular course, you will tend to believe what they say about the assignment and take their advice on board. Now, next is control, and control is about the power to command. When an individual is seen to have the power to punish or reward, we are more inclined to believe and to follow whatever messaging that's being put out. For example, as a course coordinator, the guidelines that I set is what everyone will follow, because if not, you might have a chance of failing the course. Or if the individual seems to have authority over the topic, you'll tend to listen and follow too. For example, a doctor will have the authority over giving medical advice. Therefore, you tend not to question what your doctors say on whether they're right or wrong. Now, lastly, if the individual has the power to scrutinize where they will judge you, we are also more likely to follow what they say. The last one is charisma. It's all about the risk. It can be driven because the person is attractive, because we tend to be drawn to people who we think are attractive and ignore people who we think are less attractive. Now, this is something that is unfortunate, but it's how the world works. And that's why there's so much emphasis on this. If we like a person, we also tend to listen to a person more. And when you dislike someone, automatically your mind goes into defensive mode. For example, if you don't like your lecturer, you'll find them forever boring, even though 90% of the class might find the lecturer interesting. We are also drawn to people who are similar to us, who like similar things, or we perceive to think similarly to us. This is the reason why I do a lot of research on the case studies that I use for this course, because I want you to understand the concepts by showing you something that you recognize so that you think that our perceived interests are similar, and hopefully you'll be more open to working towards understanding the concepts we are looking at. So lastly, we have familiarity, which is when you always see the individual or you've always been receiving a message from them. They become familiar to you, so you tend to listen to them more. For example, because you will see Oshani in person and more often than seeing me, you'll be more inclined to email me your questions and concerns to your tutor, Oshani, than to me when you start your in-person tutorials. Now, as you can tell with the examples that I've given you, they do not need to be mutually exclusive. It can be 1, 2, or all 3 Cs. So with the example I've been giving you about being the course coordinator of this course, I actually sit under all 3 Cs. Let's look at credibility. So I'm seen as the expert of the NM1101X content because I created the content, I'm giving you the lecture, and I'm the coordinator of the course. I create the lecture slides, I create the tutorial activities, and your assignments, including your tests. Now, second, control. I have the power to pass or fail you with this course, along with Oshani, who is your tutor, as she will be marking your assignment, but I will have the final say. And last is charisma, because I produce the content that I hope makes you think that we are similar. And those who come to the lecture or listen to this recorded lecture, actually, will be more familiar with me. Now, next, we'll be looking at how we can apply the 3 Cs using Pathos, one of the canons of persuasion. So why am I focusing on Pathos? Well, it's because emotions can be difficult to predict, and we don't know if it's a hit or miss, and we need to consider the limitations and issues that can take place. Now, knowing what to leverage, which one of the C's to leverage is important. And you do not need to use all 3 at once. I always remember this, and I learned this when I was in poly during my diploma nearly 20 years ago. I remember my advertising lecturer was telling us KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid. Keeping your message as simple as possible is always the best way to go. Now, in public relations, it's never about the more is the merrier. No, it's about being strategic and having a plan. Justify the why you're doing what you're doing helps you to be strategic. It helps you to see where the weaknesses and strengths are. Now, here are some prompts you can think about if you're thinking about using the 3 Cs to understand how this works. First, we look at credibility. So to answer whether this person has expertise or not, we look at whether the source has relevant knowledge or experience. Now, status is looking at whether the source or representative has prestige. Competency is whether the message is communicated with clarity and confidence. And honesty, which is the public or receiver trust. Do the public or receiver trust what is being communicated? Next, when we look at control, we look at whether the source or source or spokesperson have the power to punish or reward. We also think about whether the message speaks with absolute authority, where we ask the question, does it offer the public or receiver similar authority? And scrutiny is where we ask, does the message depend on the source being perceived as having the power to examine, investigate, and judge? Now, the last C's of the 3 C's is charisma. And we're asking the questions, is the spokesperson attractive to the public or receiver? Is the spokesperson likable? And when we look at similarity, we look at whether the spokesperson is similar to the public or receiver. Lastly, the source or spokesperson, is it familiar to the public or receiver? Is it someone that they know? Now, I'm going to now go through a couple of examples to demonstrate how all this works. Now, let's look at this example from last week again.
Over 400 Hollywood stars, including Jennifer Aniston, Tom Hanks, and Meryl Streep, have signed an open letter by the American Civil Liberties Union, condemning Disney's suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live and supporting free speech. The letter states, "We the people must never accept government threats to our freedom of speech. Efforts by leaders to pressure artists, journalists, and companies with retaliation for their speech strike at the heart of what it means to live in a free country." Some of the signatories include Selena Gomez, Robert De Niro, Jane Fonda, Olivia Rodrigo, Michael Keaton, Regina King, Diego Luna, Natalie Portman, Martin Short, Kerry Washington, and Pedro Pascal, whose trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu movie was released this morning by Disney. The letter goes on to say, "We know this moment is bigger than us and our industry. Teachers, government employees, law firms, researchers, universities, students, and so many more are also facing direct attacks on their freedom of expression." The message closes by calling on all Americans to fight to defend our right to speak freely.
Now let's put the 3Cs into practice. Over here, we can say that the perspective of fans of the celebrities supporting Jimmy Kimmel, and these celebrities demonstrate credibility and charisma. So these celebrities have status, they are seen to have prestige, credibility, and to their fans, they are attractive, they are likable, and have a similar mindset to them, and they are viewed as a familiar figure. Now, when we look at the anti-vape campaign, we can say that it sits under control because the government has the power to punish or reward you. So you get a fine if you get caught vaping. Now, this advertisement has authority because of where the message is coming from. It's coming from the government. And it falls under credibility as well, as the campaign is done by the Health Promotion Board. It demonstrates their expertise in terms of health, as is the state organizations that take care of Singaporeans' health. So let's bring in the canons of persuasion. Now, I want to talk to you about Pathos, as emotions can be very effective. Now, with Pathos, it's also known as emotions, and it can include the following appeals: humor, fear, guilt, and many other emotions, including love, virtue, and sex, which is about sensuality. Now, we'll be focusing on humor because fear and guilt appeal are the toughest to achieve. Now, with the anti-vape campaign, we can say that they are using humor appeal with a splash of fear. So think about the fines. Humor is effective because it gains attention. And when it's done right, it can put people into a positive mood because it makes people laugh. And you'll be more open to the message. You'll be more persuaded to it. But at the same time, it can offend people if it is not done right. Remember the e-payment advertisement that I showed you in the last lecture? Now, this was meant to be funny, but it failed to make people laugh. The message also gets lost because people will only remember what they are offended about. Now, fear appeal is a negative appeal that's used to generate apprehension to the public. In the public. It creates a fearful mood and creates a sense of urgency, asking audiences to take action on an issue, to curb a bad habit, or to solve a problem. Sometimes it can be gory, something gory like you see on cigarette boxes, but other times they can use an authoritarian approach, such as the anti-vape campaign, where the focus is on the fear of getting a $2,000 fine, and also from a more personal perspective on how it can ruin or impact your health. And as I mentioned, it doesn't always have to be gory. In this instance, the campaign here for texting and driving demonstrates fear differently in how we perceive what fear should look like to our audience. Over here, you can see the fear of taking away someone's life, and it's shocking, but not disturbingly shocking. So in terms of the 3Cs, this advertisement falls under the category of credibility, which is expertise, and control, authority because it's from Think Road Safety, a campaign from the British government. And the reason for not doing this is because when you do something that the audience expects, such as a bloody body on the ground, the overusage of this means audiences can become numb to the message. For example, with the photos on cigarette packets, I used to be a smoker and those pictures did not faze me at all. Or people might avoid it because there's an overemphasis of fear. And sometimes they can also be potentially disturbing to particular audience, which may lead to trauma. Now, in the pink cat advertisement, we saw that there's also an emphasis on guilt, where it provokes a sense of shame or guilt to the audience, the guilt of killing someone innocent. We also see a lot of guilt campaigns around war, hunger, and so forth. So what it does here is it aims to get audiences' attention through introspection and self-blame to drive action out of anger. Now, it's your responsibility to stop or solve a problem. This is what they're trying to get you to think because they're leveraging on empathy. The idea here is that you need to think about others before you think about yourself. Now, this advertisement that you see on screen here is also another example of guilt appeal where it aims to make you feel guilty if you don't look like this. They even highlighted the O in the word body. Now, if we look at using semiotic analysis, we can look at the denotative meaning of O. It is round in shape. And the connotative meaning is that someone who has a round body figure, right? Which generalize into someone being overweight. But that's the difference between public relation and advertising. Advertising is to encourage us to take action. You feel guilty, perhaps, that your body doesn't look like what you see on screen, so you purchase their weight loss products. Whereas public relations is about what people say about the organization and not what you say about yourself in reference to the product or service. Like fear, the overuse of guilt can make people numb to the messaging, and overemphasis might lead to message avoidance. It can also produce certain stereotypes about particular people that will not always be well received, like you see with the Beachbody advertisement. Now, you can think of channels as places with inverted commas or where your audiences would receive the information from. It's how your message will be communicated. Remember what we learned about in the medium is the message. It tells us that sometimes this is more important than the message. It's about how we interpret the message based on the form that it takes. So identifying the right channels is one of the key things that we do as communication professionals. We also have to think about what channels are available to us as well. What's the best medium to convey our message? Now, we first talk about the traditional media forms. Now, the first group of channels are what we call controlled channels because it provides organizations with some form of control, most notably in its content and timing of what certain things are released and presented. And this can include press releases. So the organization controls when they have something important to announce and what content comes out. They can also decide who is the spokesperson for the message. Official organization materials such as the organization's or institutions' official social media page or website. So for example, the official Instagram page of Taylor Swift is also considered official organization material. So advertisement also sits under control because it's being put up there by the organization and they decide what it's going to look like. So physical displays and what also happens in store is example of control too, because the store decides what's on promotion and how they want something to be displayed. So in these examples, there are one-way and two-way interactions. One-way interactions include advertisements because you don't get immediate feedback, whereas two-way interactions includes your press releases because after you release a statement, the media might ask more questions, or social media pages and website because people might leave a comment or email you to submit their feedback. And what happens in store, you can actually see your immediate audience's reactions and make the necessary changes. Now, the other group is controlled or less controlled channels. First, you have a press conference where you have a spokesperson from an organization to speak, and the journalist in the audience may ask you some questions. Now, this environment is less controlled because it's highly interactive. You can say you are not allowed to ask questions A, B, and C, but ultimately it's not in the organization's control. So interviews with external media is considered less control as you're not paying them to do or say something. You may not know their intention or agenda, so think back to agenda setting or what they would like to publish. So they might also give you a list of questions beforehand, but you don't know if they'll ask anything beyond this. You also can't control commentary, like reviews or social media comments. People will say what they want to say. But you should also think of these channels that I've listed broadly. Don't just limit yourself to the conventional ways about thinking of channels. These are just some examples, but you can also be creative with how you present your message. So there are many different channels that you can use to leverage on your campaign. For example, if you decide to use a spokesperson, and this includes celebrity endorsements, it can be highly persuasive. Interpersonal channels can also be highly engaging, but it is very labor intensive. So the amount of planning needed is labor intensive, but the reach might not be as great. For example, it will be like a roadshow or an exhibition. Now, if this is your campaign plan, you need to provide a rationale to justify why your audience needs this form of particular engagement. What is the message you'd like to show your audience? What opportunity can it create? Now, the second channel is broadly known as organizational media, and this could include your organization's or brand's official social media channels, website, and newsletter. Now, it's useful when your public and target audience is large or super wide, and this can be useful as you have some control of the messaging, but you don't have much control of how they'll respond. It's also cost effective as it is not labor intensive or requires as much planning as interpersonal channels. Now, third is news media, and it's uncontrolled because you can't control what the journalist reports on, but they can help you to reach out to their audience, hence increasing your target audience. So how do you engage with the news media? Now, they might not find your campaign newsworthy, so you need to ask yourself this question: what do you need to tell them in order to make them want to tell the story? Now, fourth, we have advertising, which is similar to what we talked about just a moment ago. So it's not just about creating social media advertisements or having something on television, but it can be interactive, like what we've seen with the anti-vape TikTok campaign. It also includes advertisement on trains, train stations, bus stops, bus stop advertisements too. Now, the diagram here illustrates the relationship between audience reach and persuasive impact. As I mentioned, when we look at interpersonal communication, the persuasive impact is strong, which is why it has the largest share of the triangle. But in terms of audience reach, it might be low. Now, whereas it's the opposite for advertising and promotional media, there's no right or wrong answer on what you must see, but it's about how you justify it. How does your channel support your strategy and message? Now, I just want to end this section with Charlie Puth's video of Singapore Tourism Board. And let's play this video before I talk about it a bit more.
One kopi o koso, please. Yeah. Is that another uhu? Is that uhu too? Hello, I'm Charlie Puth. I believe that everything in this life can be made into music.
What do you think about Singapore so far?
It's been wonderful. It always bummed me out that I had to fly in for a promo or a show and not experience any of the culture firsthand. They say that it's rainy season. I don't believe them. I mean, this is incredible.
Bing, bing, bing.
Switch it up now.
Welcome to the Projector, Singapore's indie cinema.
Ooh.
Do you get inspired from the movies?
I do get inspired from the movies. I actually think of something visual every time I make a piece of music.
Let's head down to one of my personal favorite spots. This is a really traditional coffee shop that makes a delicious local breakfast.
Okay, it smells like American coffee. Does it taste the same? Ooh, it's better.
It's
Feeling
better.
good.
Charlie?
I know what you're gonna ask. It's a G sharp and an A. Minor second, two dissonant tones rubbing against each other.
Over here, you can see that they're using Charlie as a spokesperson and creating content for their organizational media. Now, let's go into the last section, which is evaluation and the considerations you need to have when evaluating your campaign. First, as a team, you need to ask yourself, what is the purpose of your campaign? When you're looking at your goals and objectives, how are you building awareness and what are you trying to achieve? Then you need to think about how should your campaign be judged? What information do you need to make an assessment? You also then need to think about where can you get this information from and who has this information and how can you obtain it? As you start framing the information you need and how you get it, you also need to consider who is this evaluation for? So you can get that information from your project brief and what information would be useful to them. And it can come in form of surveys. So for big campaigns, they might do a nationwide campaign to check if you're aware of this campaign. You may have received this on YouTube or Instagram ads where they ask you if you've seen this advertisement for a particular brand. Or perhaps you may have an event and you can do a post-event survey or look at whether there's an increased request for information or an increase in website traffic, sales, or visitorship. Now, for your assignment, you need to propose how you will be evaluating the campaign so you don't have to evaluate it. Now, I would like to end off this lecture with a campaign from McDonald's to summarize everything we've covered this week. So our key takeaways. They actually practice Kairos here, which is one of the kinds of persuasion, which is about timing, where they release a video to mark a festive or celebratory moment or holiday in Singapore.
Rasa sayang, hey, rasa sayang, sayang, hey, sayang.
Sayang.
Rasa sayang, hey, rasa sayang, sayang, hey, hey, lihat nona jauh, rasa sayang, sayang, hey.
So in this advertisement, they're using Pathos, which is love appeal, where they focus on family love and the love you have for your community. So out of the 3 C's, credibility was used. The video's message was communicated with clarity and confidence, and charisma, where they're playing on the familiarity characteristics. We are familiar with the brand, the idea of a family, and also as Singaporeans, regardless of our ethnicity, which is their target audience, we are familiar with the song Rasa Sayang and the concept of buka, which is breaking fast during Ramadan. So for the task for lecture 8, you need to do a reflection. And in the reflection, I would like you to think of one successful or unsuccessful campaign that leverage on the 3 C's, either individually or as a combination. And a bonus, if you want to take this time to practice, you can also talk about the different pathos that was being used, emotional appeal. And you also need to do the revision quiz. So here on the screen, you see a course, list of course at CNM that covers communication management. I teach 2 courses here in NM4230, Communication for Social Change, and NM4207, Managing Communication Campaign. Although NM2219, Principles of Communication Management, is not a prerequisite for the other courses, it's important that you take it as you learn all the foundation communication management theories, which will make your life easier as you go into your 3rd and 4th year. So thank you, and I will see you in the next lecture.